Leonard Monroe, a quiet 78-year-old veteran, feeds stray cats daily behind crystal nails, unaware of his Medal of Honor's significance. Karen Matthysse, the salon's owner, enraged by the mess, calls police to remove the vagrant. Officer Daniel Rocha discovers Leonard's medal, saluting his heroism from Operation Junction Rain. The confrontation goes viral, revealing Leonard's past sacrifices. A community ceremony honors him, and 8-year-old Leah joins his mission, inspiring others. Karen, humbled, supports them. What secret courage lies in Leonard's simple acts? Will his quiet heroism change the town forever? Inspired by Leonard's story? Share your own stories of kindness mistaken for weakness in the comments. Hit that like button and join our community celebrating honor in everyday acts. Let's keep compassion alive together. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and asphalt as Leonard W. Monroe shuffled along his familiar path. At 78, his steps were slow but deliberate, each one a quiet testament to a routine etched into his bones over 847 consecutive days. His shoulders, hunched beneath a threadbare jacket, bore the weight of a life lived through decades of joy and sorrow, triumphs and losses that no one in the neighborhood could have guessed. In his cross-body bag, a can of tuna and a plastic jug of water jostled softly, their purpose known only to him and the stray cats waiting at the end of his journey. To the residents of the aging apartment complex, Leonard was a ghost, seen but not truly known, a figure who moved through the margins of their lives. His quiet footsteps barely registered against the hum of morning routines, his presence as unremarkable as the peeling paint on the building's walls. Yet every day at precisely 7:15 a.m., he appeared, a solitary figure bound for the parking lot behind crystal nails, where broken concrete and discarded boxes formed a makeshift sanctuary for a colony of strays. Leonard's heart beat steady, though it carried a quiet ache. He'd long since stopped expecting the world to notice him. The cats, however, were different. They knew him, not just his schedule, but the kindness in his hands, the soft cadence of his voice. By 7:30, they gathered like old friends at a flattened cardboard box that served as their dining table. Orange tabbies slunk from shadows, their eyes glinting with anticipation. Gray strays, cautious but trusting, wove between his legs. Leonard worked with the precision of ritual. He opened the tuna can with a practiced twist, spread its contents evenly across the cardboard, and filled a chipped plastic bowl with water from his jug. He picked up the scattered trash the cats had disturbed overnight, his fingers lingering on a crumpled wrapper as if it were a piece of a larger puzzle. On colder mornings, he arranged tattered towels to shield them from the chill. He spoke to them in whispers, not the cooing nonsense most reserved for pets, but words heavy with respect. "Morning, Chester," he'd murmur, watching an orange tabby claim his usual spot. "Found that worm patch again, didn't you?" "Easy patches. There's plenty for all." For Leonard, these moments were a lifeline, a tether to a world that had long since stopped asking for his story. The cats didn't care that his hands trembled slightly or that his eyes held memories of a life once filled with purpose, a career, a family, a home now reduced to echoes. They only cared that he came day after day with food and quiet company. He wondered sometimes if they sensed the weight he carried, the way each step felt like defiance against a world that had tried to erase him. Across the parking lot, Karen Matthysse watched from behind the glass door of Crystal Nails, her new salon, her life's gamble. For 3 weeks, she'd observed Leonard's routine, and each day her frustration grew, a slow-burning ember threatening to ignite. At 42, Karen had clawed her way out of a childhood marked by chaos, shouting matches, unpaid bills, the constant threat of eviction. She'd built a life of order, of control, pouring every cent of her savings into this salon, a beacon of her determination to rise above. The sight of Leonard with his worn bag and his cats was an affront to everything she'd fought for. To her, he was a vagrant, a symbol of the mess she'd spent her life escaping. The cats were worse, filthy, unpredictable, a threat to the pristine image she'd envisioned for her business. Customers had already complained about the faint smell of cat lingering in the air, and Karen's nerves, stretched taut by the pressure of keeping her dream alive, were fraying. She'd tried everything to stop him. She'd spoken to the building owner, her voice sharp with conviction, only to be met with a shrug. She'd hammered no loitering signs into the ground, their bold letters a silent scream. She'd even scattered mothballs around the lot, their chemical stench a desperate attempt to drive the cats away. But Leonard kept coming, and the cats multiplied, their presence a quiet rebellion against her carefully ordered world. That Tuesday morning, when she arrived to find her dumpster overturned, garbage strewn across the lot like a mockery of her efforts, something inside her snapped. Her heart pounded with a mix of rage and fear that her dream was slipping, that the chaos she'd fought so hard to escape was creeping back in. "Hey!" she shouted, bursting through the back door of Crystal Nails, her voice cutting through the morning quiet. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Leonard paused, his hand still on the tuna can, but he didn't turn. He'd heard shouts like this before, angry voices demanding he justify his existence. He'd learned that silence often outlasted rage. Karen stormed toward him, her steps fueled by weeks of pent-up frustration. "This is the last time," she said, her voice rising. "You can't keep doing this. It's loitering. It's trespassing. You're making a mess, attracting pests, driving away my customers." Leonard turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. They were calm, weathered, the eyes of a man who'd seen enough of the world to know the difference between anger born of hate and anger born of fear. Karen's fury faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the quiet dignity in his gaze. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice steady but not confrontational, "I'm just feeding them. They're hungry." "I don't care if they're starving," Karen's voice climbed higher, her hands clenched into fists. "This is private property. You can't just set up a homeless camp for cats behind my business." "I'm not homeless," Leonard replied, his tone even, almost gentle. "And neither are they. They just need help." The simplicity of his words, the quiet conviction behind them, only fueled Karen's frustration. To her, it was defiance, a refusal to respect the boundaries she'd fought so hard to establish. "Don't get smart with me," she snapped, stepping closer. "I've been watching you for weeks, every single day, same thing. I'm done with it." She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling with a mix of adrenaline and righteous indignation. She dialed 911, her voice sharp as she spoke to the dispatcher. "There's a vagrant trespassing behind my business," she said, her eyes locked on Leonard. "He's feeding stray cats, making a mess. I need him gone." Leonard stood still, his hands resting at his sides. He didn't argue or plead. He'd been through this before. Accusations, assumptions, the weight of being seen as less than human. But beneath his calm exterior, a flicker of sadness stirred. He thought of the cats, of Chester and Patches, of the trust they'd placed in him. He wondered if Karen could see it, their hunger, their need, the way they looked to him as their only constant in a world that had abandoned them. When the police officer arrived, his presence was commanding, his uniform crisp against the backdrop of the littered lot. Karen stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mix of triumph and defiance. She expected swift action, a validation of her complaint. But as the officer approached Leonard, something shifted. The old man reached into his jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. The officer's eyes widened, and in an instant, his hand snapped to his forehead in a crisp salute, a gesture so unexpected it seemed to freeze the air around them. Karen's smug grin vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then unease. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice low, almost reverent, "do you realize what you just did?" In that moment, the parking lot felt like the center of the universe, a place where hidden truths were about to unravel. Leonard's secret, tucked away in his pocket, was more than a possession. It was a testament to a life of quiet heroism, a story that would leave an entire community reevaluating the man they had overlooked for so long. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of the Crystal Nails parking lot, where tension hung thick in the air. Karen stood with her arms crossed, her lips pursed in a tight line, her eyes burning with indignation. Every day, without fail, Leonard shuffled into her domain, turning her carefully maintained property into what she saw as a filthy haven for stray animals. To her, it was an affront, a personal insult to her authority as the owner of this small nail salon on Oakwood Street. She felt her blood boil as she watched him, An old man with weathered hands and a stubborn streak kneeled down to open yet another can of tuna. The sharp metallic pop of the can's lid echoed, and Karen's frustration surged. This was her space, her business, her pride, and he was defiling it. She'd warned him before, her voice rising with each encounter, but he always ignored her, as if her words were nothing more than background noise. Today she'd had enough. Her heart raced with the thrill of taking control, of finally putting an end to this daily invasion. Leonard, oblivious to Karen's mounting rage, focused on the task at hand. The familiar sound of the can opening summoned three cats, their scrawny forms darting from beneath a rusted pickup truck parked at the lot's edge. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, and Leonard's own eyes softened as he watched them approach. To him, these creatures weren't pests, they were companions, fragile lives depending on his quiet acts of kindness. He whispered softly to Chester, the orange tabby who always claimed the first bite, his voice low and soothing, as if sharing a secret with an old friend. The world around him, Karen's shouts, the hum of distant traffic, faded into a blur. Leonard's hands moved with practiced care, dividing the tuna into small, equal portions, ensuring each cat got its share. His knees ached as he bent down, but the discomfort was a small price to pay for the fleeting joy of watching them eat. He refilled a chipped plastic bowl with water, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. An empty cardboard box used to carry his supplies lay nearby. He folded it neatly and tucked it under his arm, already planning to dispose of it properly. To Leonard, this wasn't just feeding strays, it was a duty, a quiet rebellion against a world that often overlooked the small and the vulnerable. Karen's voice pierced the air like a blade. "That's it," she screamed, her face flushed with fury. "I'm calling the police. You'll see what happens when you ignore property owners." Her hands trembled with a mix of anger and triumph as she yanked her phone from her purse and dialed 911. She spoke loudly, deliberately, ensuring Leonard heard every word. "Yes, I need police at Crystal Nails on Oakwood Street. There's a man trespassing on my property, creating a public nuisance, and refusing to leave when asked. He's some kind of vagrant, feeding stray animals and making a mess." Her voice dripped with disdain, each syllable a jab meant to wound. She felt powerful, righteous even, as she painted Leonard as a villain, a threat to the order she'd worked so hard to maintain. In her mind, she was defending her territory, protecting her livelihood from this stubborn, old man who dared to defy her. Leonard didn't flinch. He continued his routine, his hands steady as he placed the last portion of tuna on the ground. Chester nuzzled closer and Leonard's lips curved into a faint smile. He wasn't ignoring Karen out of spite. He simply didn't see her anger as his concern. His world was here, with the cats, with the small acts that gave his days meaning. Karen's threats, her raised voice, they were like distant thunder, unsettling but not enough to stop him. He murmured to the gray cat now weaving between his legs, his voice a gentle hum of reassurance. When Karen announced triumphantly, "They'll be here in 5 minutes, then we'll see how tough you are," Leonard merely straightened up, his knees creaking in protest. He turned to face her, his expression calm, unreadable. Not quite pity, not quite defiance, but something softer, sadder. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, "I hope your day gets better." The words weren't meant to provoke. They came from a place of quiet sincerity, a wish for peace despite the storm brewing around him. He sat down on an overturned milk crate, the gray cat curling up beside him, and waited, his hand gently stroking its fur. 6 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled into the lot, its tires crunching against the gravel. 2 officers stepped out. Travis Clay, a 26-year-old rookie whose crisp uniform still carried the starch of the academy, and Daniel Roach-Cha, a 41-year-old veteran whose broad shoulders and steady gaze hinted at a life shaped by discipline and hard-won experience. Karen rushed toward them, her steps quick and eager, as if their arrival was the cavalry come to save her kingdom. "Thank God you're here," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and vindication. She pointed at Leonard, her finger trembling with accusation. "That's him right there. Look at this mess. Food scattered everywhere, attracting who knows what diseases." Her words tumbled out in a rush, each one laced with her need to be heard. to be validated. She saw the cans, the water bowl, the cats slinking around, and in her mind, it was chaos, a blight on her pristine business. She wanted these officers to see it her way, to act swiftly and decisively, to restore her sense of control. Travis, eager to prove himself, pulled out his notebook, his pen poised to document what seemed like a straightforward case of trespassing. His training had taught him to follow protocol, to gather facts, to resolve conflicts efficiently. He glanced at the scattered cans in the makeshift feeding station, his brow furrowing as he mentally cataloged the scene. Daniel, however, hung back, his eyes scanning the lot with the quiet intensity of someone who'd seen too much to rush to judgment. His years on the force, coupled with a past that included military service, had honed his ability to read people, to sense the undercurrents beneath a situation. He watched Leonard, noting the old man's calm demeanor, the way he stood slowly as they approached, his hands visible and empty, a gesture of non-threatening compliance. The gray cat darted away, but Chester lingered, watching from beneath the parked car, as if guarding Leonard from a distance. "Good morning, officers," Leonard said, his voice steady, almost serene. Travis, consulting his notes, took the lead. "Sir, we've had a complaint about trespassing and creating a public nuisance. The property owner says you've been coming here daily despite being asked to leave." His tone was professional, but there was a hint of uncertainty. He was still learning how to navigate these encounters. Leonard's response was simple, unapologetic. "I feed the cats," he said. "They need food." His words carried no defiance, only a quiet truth, as if the act of feeding these animals was as natural as breathing. Karen stepped forward, her voice sharp with vindication. "See, he admits it. He's been doing this for weeks, completely ignoring my request to stop. This is private property." Her frustration spilled over, her hands gesturing wildly at the cans, the cats, the imagined filth. She felt the officer's presence as her victory, proof that she was in the right. Travis nodded, his eyes sweeping the scene again. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his tone firm but polite. Leonard reached into his worn jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, careful not to startle the young officer. His fingers closed around his wallet, a cracked leather relic that had been with him for decades, carrying memories he rarely spoke of. But as he pulled it out, something else slipped free. A small wooden box, no larger than a deck of cards, wrapped in faded parachute cord. It hit the concrete with a soft clatter, and Leonard's heart skipped a beat. He bent to retrieve it, but Daniel was faster. "I'll get that for you, sir," the older officer said, kneeling down with a grace that belied his years. As he picked up the box, the cord loosened slightly, revealing a glimpse of its contents. In that moment, something shifted in Daniel's eyes. His breath caught, and his entire demeanor changed. His shoulders softened, his grip on the box tightening as if it were something sacred. Daniel stood slowly, cradling the box in both hands, his gaze flickering between it and Leonard's weathered face. "Travis," he said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Step back a moment." Travis blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his partner's tone. "What? Why?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notebook. Karen, sensing the change in the air, leaned forward, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What is it? What's in there? Is it drugs? I knew something was off." Her mind raced, conjuring images of illicit substances, of Leonard as some kind of criminal mastermind hiding behind his quiet facade. But Daniel ignored her, his focus locked on Leonard. His expression was one Travis had never seen before, a mix of shock, reverence, and something deeper, almost personal. "Sir," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I?" Leonard met his gaze, his eyes steady, and gave a small nod, a silent permission that carried the weight of a shared understanding. Daniel's hands trembled as he unwound the frayed cord from the wooden box, his fingers brushing against the weathered grain with a reverence he couldn't quite explain. The lid creaked open, revealing a faded silk lining, its once vivid color now a ghostly echo of what might have been a military uniform. Nestled within was a star-shaped Medal of Honor, its metal surface gleaming defiantly in the morning light, unmarred by the passage of time. The light blue ribbon, though frayed at the edges, held traces of its original hue, a quiet testament to its history. Daniel's breath hitched, and his knees nearly gave way as a flood of memories crashed over him. He'd seen this metal once before, not in person, but in a cherished photograph his father kept on their mantelpiece. That image had been a cornerstone of his childhood, a symbol of sacrifice and survival that his father spoke of with a reverence that bordered on sacred. Now, holding it, Daniel felt the weight of his father's stories pressing against his chest, threatening to unravel him. "Jesus Christ," Travis whispered, his voice low and reverent as he leaned closer, piecing together the reason for his partner's sudden stillness. The air around them thickened with unspoken understanding. Travis, younger and less seasoned, had never seen Daniel like this, rigid, almost reverent, as if standing before a monument. He glanced at the metal, then back at Daniel, his own heart quickening as he realized the gravity of what they'd stumbled upon. Karen, standing a few feet away, shifted impatiently, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her frustration was palpable. Her brows furrowed as she struggled to make sense of the scene. "What is that thing?" she demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. "Some kind of fake military medal? People buy those at flea markets all the time." Her words sliced through the moment, oblivious to the sanctity of what lay in Daniel's hands. Daniel's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with a mix of disbelief and barely contained anger. For a fleeting moment, Travis thought his partner might lose his composure entirely, might even reach for the handcuffs at his belt. Not for any crime, but for the sheer disrespect in her tone. "Ma'am," Daniel said, his voice tight, each word clipped as if carved from stone. "This is the Medal of Honor. It's awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." His jaw clenched as he spoke, the weight of the medal anchoring him to a legacy he felt compelled to defend. He turned back to Leonard, his hand rising instinctively towards a salute, a gesture born of respect so deep it felt almost sacred. "Sir," he said, his voice softening but still thick with emotion, "I need to ask about Operation Junction Rain." Leonard's weathered face shifted, his eyes widening just enough to betray a flicker of surprise. "You know about Junction Rain?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady, carrying the weight of memories long buried. The question hung in the air, connecting the two men across decades of history. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "My father was there. Sergeant Michael Roach, 1st Battalion. He told me about a staff sergeant who went back into enemy fire 3 times to pull out wounded soldiers. Said the man saved his entire squad." Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke, the pride and grief he'd carried since his father's death 5 years ago spilling out. "My father made it home because of that man. Raised 4 kids, worked for the post office for 35 years, coached Little League. He never stopped talking about the staff sergeant who saved his life." Leonard's gaze softened, his eyes tracing the lines of Daniel's face as if searching for traces of the young sergeant he'd known. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence filled only by the distant hum of morning traffic on Oakwood Street. Then with a slow nod he acknowledged the connection, his weathered hands tightening around the wooden box. The moment was heavy with unspoken gratitude, a bridge between past and present forged by shared sacrifice. Karen, still standing on the sidelines, looked from Daniel to Leonard and back again, her confusion mounting. "I don't understand," she said, her voice softer now, but still tinged with exasperation. "What does any of this have to do with cats and trespassing?" Her words, though less hostile, betrayed her inability to grasp the magnitude of the moment. To her, this was still about a nuisance, a man feeding stray cats in her parking lot, disrupting her business. She couldn't see the history, the heroism, the humanity standing before her. Daniel turned to face her, his chest rising and falling as he fought to maintain the professional calm drilled into him over years on the force. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency, "this gentleman is a Medal of Honor recipient. He risked his life, multiple times, to save American soldiers in combat. The very least we can do is listen to why he feels these cats need to be fed." His words were measured, but his eyes burned with conviction, pleading with her to understand the weight of Leonard's actions, both then and now. Leonard, sensing the tension, gently took the box back from Daniel, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he'd performed this ritual countless times. He rewrapped the cord with care, his fingers steady despite the years etched into his skin. "They're just hungry," he said simply, his voice soft but resolute. He glanced at the stray cats gathered nearby, their eyes fixed on him with quiet trust. "Like I used to be, like a lot of people still are." He turned his gaze to Karen, his weathered eyes patient and kind, devoid of judgment. "I'm not trying to cause you trouble, ma'am. I just know what it's like to be forgotten." His words were unadorned, yet they carried a quiet power, a reminder of a life shaped by hardship and compassion. The parking lot fell silent, the weight of Leonard's words settling over them like a fog. Even the morning traffic seemed to fade, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle purring of Chester, a tabby cat who emerged from under a car and rubbed against Leonard's leg. The small gesture broke the tension, grounding them in the present. Travis, who had been quietly observing, cleared his throat, his voice gentle but firm. "Sir," he said, addressing Leonard, "would you mind if we bought you a breakfast? There's a diner just down the street." His offer was sincere, born of a newfound respect for the man standing before them, a man whose quiet heroism had reshaped the morning. Leonard's face broke into a small, genuine smile, the first he'd shown that day. "That's kind of you, officer," he said, his voice warm but resolute. "But I think the cats are still waiting for their breakfast." He gestured toward a cardboard box nearby, where 3 more cats had appeared, sitting in a neat row, their eyes fixed on him with patient expectation. The simplicity of his priorities, cats over his own comfort, spoke volumes about the man he was. Unbeknownst to them, the entire encounter had been captured on video by someone watching from a nearby apartment window. The footage, uploaded to social media within hours, showed it all. Karen's heated complaints, the officer's arrival, and the moment Daniel saluted Leonard in a parking lot surrounded by stray cats. The caption read, "Local business owner calls cops on veteran feeding cats. This is what happened next." By midday, the video had been shared 50,000 times, its reach spreading like wildfire. By the end of the week, Leonard Monroe's story had circled the globe, touching hearts and sparking conversations about compassion, sacrifice, and the quiet heroes living among us. But Leonard remained untouched by his newfound fame. He had no computer, no smartphone, no social media accounts to alert him to the world's fascination with his story. His life continued as it always had, a 7:15 a.m. departure from his modest apartment, a 7:30 a.m. arrival at the parking lot, feeding the mouse, cleaning up, and then departing. The only difference now was the number of eyes watching him from apartment windows, their curiosity piqued by the viral video. The first reporter to track him down was Lisa Chen from Channel 7 News, who arrived at his doorstep with a camera crew, hoping for an exclusive interview. Leonard, ever humble, declined politely through the door. "I already did my talking," he called out, his voice steady but firm, "a long time ago, in places where talking mattered." His words, simple yet profound, encapsulated a life lived with purpose, a life that needed no further explanation. The story of Staff Sergeant Leonard William Monroe had woven itself into the fabric of the community, rippling through military blogs and veteran circles like a quiet but unstoppable tide. The phrase Operation Junction Rain began to appear in search engines, a cryptic whisper of a mission long buried in secrecy. What came to light was nothing short of extraordinary. Leonard, a man who had faded into the background of civilian life, had served in Vietnam during a classified operation in 1972, one the government insisted had never taken place. In the chaos of an ambush, as his unit scrambled to evacuate wounded soldiers, Leonard had stood his ground. Alone, he held off enemy forces with a ferocity born of duty, making 3 separate, heart-pounding trips through a hail of gunfire to carry unconscious comrades to safety. His Medal of Honor was no mere trinket. It was a testament to a courage that burned bright in the darkest of moments. Yet upon returning home, Leonard had chosen to vanish, as if the weight of his heroism was too heavy to bear in the light of day. The military records revealed a deeper tragedy. While Leonard was overseas, his wife Ellen had been killed in a car accident. The news reached him 3 weeks after her funeral, a cruel twist of fate that left him to mourn alone, thousands of miles from home. He fulfilled his service, accepted his medal in a hushed, private ceremony, and then slipped quietly into obscurity. For 46 years, Leonard Monroe had been a shadow, living in a world that had moved on without him. His story might have remained lost to time if not for Officer Travis Clay, a young policeman whose brief encounter with the aging veteran had left an indelible mark on his soul. Travis couldn't shake the memory of Leonard's weathered face, the quiet strength in his eyes, or the mettle that had sparked their first meeting. It gnawed at him, the way he'd misjudged the man, seeing only an elderly figure and not the hero beneath. 3 days later, Travis found himself driving back to Leonard's modest apartment complex, his heart heavy with a need to make things right. He knocked on the door, his police uniform feeling tighter than usual, as if it carried the weight of his earlier missteps. "Sir, it's Officer Clay from the other day," he called out, his voice softer, almost hesitant. Leonard opened the door, his expression a mix of surprise and cautious warmth, like a man unaccustomed to visitors but not entirely opposed to them. "Something wrong, son?" he asked, his voice rough but kind, the kind of kindness that comes from a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. Travis shook his head, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "No, sir, I wanted to apologize. I didn't handle things right the first time. I should have asked more questions instead of assuming." Leonard studied him, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if peering into Travis's intentions. After a moment, he nodded, a faint glimmer of understanding in his gaze. "You were doing your job, son. Nothing wrong with that." But Travis wasn't ready to let himself off the hook. "There is something wrong with how I did it," he insisted, his voice trembling with a mix of guilt and resolve. "I saw an old man and made assumptions. I didn't see a veteran who'd earned respect, a man who'd earned more than I could ever understand." Leonard's expression softened, and he stepped aside, gesturing toward the small living room. "Coffee, home?" he offered, his tone practical but not unkind. The apartment was modest, its walls worn but spotless, every surface gleaming with the kind of care that spoke of discipline and pride. On the mantelpiece sat a single photograph, a young woman with kind eyes and a smile that seemed to echo Leonard's own, though his had been dimmed by years of loss. "That's Ellen," Leonard said quietly, noticing Travis's gaze. "My wife. She died while I was away. Never got to say goodbye." The words carried a weight that filled the room, a quiet ache that spoke of love and loss intertwined. For 2 hours, they sat at Leonard's small kitchen table, the scent of coffee mingling with the weight of their conversation. Leonard spoke of Ellen, her infectious laugh, her love for planting flowers, the way she'd hum softly while cooking dinner. He spoke of the war, of the brothers in arms he'd lost, and of returning to a world that felt empty without her. Travis listened, his heart heavy with empathy for the man who had carried such pain in silence. "The cats," Leonard said at last, a faint smile breaking through, "they don't care about medals or rank. They just know if you're kind or not." Word of Travis's visit spread like a quiet ripple, first to his colleague Daniel Rocha, then to their captain, and finally to the mayor, who saw a chance to honor a forgotten hero. A ceremony was planned for the following Saturday in Memorial Park, not a grand military parade or a political spectacle, but a simple gathering of the community, a moment to pause and reflect. Leonard, however, wanted no part of it. "I don't need ceremonies," he told the mayor, his voice firm but tinged with weariness. "I just need people to leave me and the cats alone." The mayor, undeterred, met his gaze with quiet determination. "Mr. Monroe, this isn't about what you need, it's about what we need. We need to remember how to see honor, how to recognize it when it's standing right in front of us." On Saturday morning, Memorial Park came alive with an unexpected crowd. Veterans from 3 counties made the pilgrimage, their faces etched with pride and a quiet camaraderie. Families brought children who had heard whispers of Leonard's story, their young eyes wide with wonder at the idea of a real-life hero. Even Leonard's neighbors, people who had lived beside him for years without ever knowing his name, showed up, drawn by a newfound respect for the quiet man in their midst. Karen Matthysse stood at the back of the crowd, her arms crossed tightly, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. The past week had been a nightmare. A video of her screaming at Leonard, a Medal of Honor recipient, had spread across the internet, and the backlash had been relentless. Angry calls flooded her business, and she had seriously considered shutting it down and leaving town. But on Thursday evening, Daniel Rocha had paid her a visit. "Ma'am," he'd said, his voice steady but kind, Mr. Monroe specifically asked that no charges be filed against you and that people stop harassing your business. Karen had been stunned, her disbelief giving way to a flood of guilt. He said that? After how I treated him? Daniel nodded. Yes, ma'am, he said. Everyone deserves a second chance. Now, as Karen watched Leonard stand awkwardly at the podium, his hands fidgeting as the mayor read a proclamation, she felt a wave of shame mixed with a profound respect. Leonard looked out of place in the spotlight, his discomfort evident in the way he shifted his weight, as if longing for the quiet of his apartment in the company of his cats. When Daniel was invited to speak, he stepped to the microphone, clutching a folded piece of paper. His voice was steady but thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, my father used to say that real heroes don't need microphones. They don't need headlines or parades. They just need us to pay attention, to see them for who they are and what they've done. In the quiet hum of a small town where the daily grind often drowned out acts of quiet compassion, one man's steadfast dedication stood out like a beacon. For over 2 years, Leonard Monroe had been tending to a group of stray cats in a neglected parking lot behind a strip mall. While others sped by, grumbling about the noise or the scattered mess left by the animals, Leonard carried out his humble mission with the same resolve he'd shown decades earlier in Vietnam. Back then, he'd cared for soldiers who couldn't fend for themselves, and now, in his own way, he was doing the same for these forgotten creatures. His actions went unnoticed by most, but they spoke volumes to those who paused long enough to see. At a community gathering, the speaker's voice cut through the crowd's murmurs, his gaze fixed on Leonard, who sat unassumingly among them. The man recounted Leonard's quiet heroism, not just in the jungles of 1972, but in the daily ritual he'd maintained for 847 mornings. Leonard never sought praise, never boasted of his past, never raised his voice to demand attention. Yet, when the moment came to stand for what was right, he rose with the same unshakable conviction he'd carried all those years ago. The crowd fell silent, absorbing the weight of his unspoken courage. When the applause finally faded, Leonard approached the microphone, his weathered face betraying little of the storm of emotions within. He scanned the sea of faces, some familiar, most strangers, each watching him with a mix of awe and respect. I appreciate this, he said, his voice steady but soft. But those cats will still be hungry tomorrow. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience, but Leonard's expression remained earnest. To him, kindness wasn't a fleeting moment to be celebrated. It was a daily choice, one that demanded persistence even when the world turned indifferent. Some days that choice felt effortless. Others, it weighed heavy, but he made it regardless. His eyes drifted to the back of the room, landing on Karen, a neighbor who'd once criticized the cat's presence. Her gaze met his, softened now with understanding. We all stumble, Leonard added, his words deliberate. What counts is what we do after. Across town in a modest apartment overlooking the parking lot, 8-year-old Laia Rodriguez had been watching Leonard's routine unfold for 3 weeks. Ever since the Catman became a local legend, she'd made it her mission to observe him from her bedroom window. Each morning at 7:25, she'd press her nose to the glass, her breath fogging the pain as she waited for the old man with the slow, deliberate walk and hands that moved with surprising gentleness. Leia had given each cat a name: Chester, with his scruffy orange fur; Patches, the calico who limped; Shadow, the shy black one; Princess, who strutted regally; and Trouble, who always pounced on the others. She studied Leonard's care, the way he spoke softly to the cats, as if they understood his words. To Leia, he wasn't just feeding strays. He was their protector, their friend. The morning after the ceremony, Leia woke with a resolve that burned brighter than her usual daydreams. She'd been saving her allowance for a new doll, its glossy box taunting her from a store shelf for weeks. But as she lay in bed, her thoughts drifted to the cats, their hungry eyes, and the man who never failed them. By 7:20, she'd made up her mind. Clutching 3 crumpled dollar bills, she slipped out of the apartment, her sneakers silent on the stairs. At the corner store, she carefully selected 2 cans of cat food and a small bag of kibble, her heart racing with the thrill of her secret mission. She hurried back to the parking lot, her small arms straining under the weight of her purchases. There, beside the cardboard feeding station Leonard had built, she sat cross-legged, arranging the cans in a tidy row like offerings at an altar. When Leonard arrived, his footsteps slowed at the sight of the little girl waiting for him. Her serious expression, framed by two braids, caught him off guard. "Hello," Leia said, her voice solemn but proud. "I brought breakfast too." Leonard blinked, surprise flickering across his face, though his calm demeanor held firm. "That's mighty kind of you, miss," he said, his tone warm but cautious. "But your folks might worry if they don't know where you are." Leia shrugged, her eyes fixed on the cans. "My mom's still sleeping. She works nights at the hospital." She held up a can, her small fingers gripping it tightly. "I saw you on TV. You saved soldiers. Now you save cats." Leonard shook his head gently, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I just feed them, that's all." But Leia's conviction was unshakable, her voice carrying the certainty only an 8-year-old could muster. "No, my teacher says feeding someone who's hungry is always saving them." She'd already opened one can with a borrowed opener, though the lid was jagged and uneven. Leonard knelt beside her, his knees creaking, and helped smooth the edges with practiced care. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice soft, as if afraid to break the moment. "Leia," she replied, meeting his gaze. "What's yours?" "Leonard, but most folks call me Len." Her face lit up. "Can I call you Mr. Len?" He chuckled, a sound that felt foreign after so long. "I'd like that very much." Together they fed the cats, Leia's chatter filling the quiet morning air. She told him about school, her best friend who loved drawing, and her mother who worked grueling shifts but always tucked her in with a kiss. Leonard listened, his heart stirring with a warmth he hadn't realized he'd missed. Ordinary conversation, unburdened by expectation, felt like a gift. When they finished, Leia stood, brushing off her jeans with determination. "I'm going to come help every day," she declared, "if that's okay." Leonard studied her, her earnest eyes, her squared shoulders, the careful way she'd stacked the empty cans for disposal. "I think the cats would like that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you got to ask your mom first." Leia nodded, unfazed. "She won't mind. She helps people too. That's why she's a nurse." Leia's daily presence shifted something in the parking lot's rhythm. Other children in the apartment complex began to notice, their curiosity piqued by the sight of a girl their age tending to the cats. Parents, who'd once rushed past without a glance, slowed their steps, drawn by the unlikely duo. On the third morning, Maria Rodriguez, Leia's mother, came searching for her daughter. Her heart pounded with worry as she called out, "Leia Elena Rodriguez!" She found Leia sitting beside Leonard, deep in conversation about why Shadow always ate alone. "What are you doing out here?" Maria asked, her voice a mix of relief and exasperation. Leia looked up, undaunted. "I'm feeding the cats with Mr. Len, Mama. He's a hero." Maria hesitated, her gaze shifting to Leonard. She'd seen the viral video, heard the story of the quiet veteran, but meeting him in person felt different. There was a gentleness in his eyes, a steadiness that put her at ease, despite her instincts to pull Leia close. Leonard Monroe was a man who carried himself with a quiet dignity, a stark contrast to the bustling world around him. As Maria approached, her steps hesitant yet curious, Leonard rose from his crouched position near the makeshift feeding station behind the nail salon. His hands, weathered from years of unseen labor, brushed off the dust from his worn jeans as he stood respectfully. "Ma'am," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I hope it's all right. Your daughter, Leia, she's been helping me with the cats. She's a good kid, real responsible." His eyes, framed by faint lines etched by time and unspoken stories, held a warmth that disarmed Maria's initial wariness. She studied his face, searching for any hint of pretense, but found only a gentle sincerity and a genuine fondness for her daughter. A flicker of relief softened her expression. "Leia hasn't stopped talking about you," Maria admitted, her voice tinged with a mix of amusement and awe. "She goes on about the cats, about how you teach her to be kind to creatures that are hungry, about how heroes don't always wear capes or look like they do in the movies." Maria's words carried a weight of gratitude, her heart swelling with pride for her daughter's insight. Leonard's lips curved into a modest smile, his gaze drifting toward the alley where a few stray cats lingered, their eyes glinting in the morning light. "She's a smart one," he said, his tone laced with quiet admiration. smarter than most grown folks I've met in my time. His words weren't flattery, but a simple truth, spoken with the conviction of someone who had seen enough of the world to know the rarity of such wisdom in a child. In the days that followed, Laya's enthusiasm became a spark that ignited something unexpected. Within a week, she had rallied two of her friends to join her in the morning ritual, their small hands carefully portioning out food under Leonard's patient guidance. By the second week, a small crowd of children, their ages ranging from 6 to 10, gathered each dawn, their laughter and chatter filling the alley with a warmth it had never known. They took turns with the feeding routine, each one eager to contribute to the care of the forgotten cats. For Leonard, watching this unfold was like witnessing a small rebellion against indifference, a quiet uprising led by the pure-hearted determination of a second grader. Karen Nguyen, the owner of the nail salon, observed this growing scene from the window of her shop, her emotions a tangled knot of wonder and regret. The children were meticulous, their small feet tiptoeing around to avoid leaving any mess, and their parents, touched by the kindness their children were learning, had begun to frequent her business, their smiles a silent thank you. Yet Karen couldn't shake the weight of her initial judgment. The way she had once viewed Leonard's solitary acts with suspicion, mistaking his quiet compassion for something to be questioned. The memory of her own prejudice sat heavy in her chest, a dull ache that grew sharper with each passing day. One morning, driven by a resolve she could no longer ignore, Karen stepped outside as Leonard finished the feeding, now surrounded by 4 children whose faces glowed with purpose. "Mr. Monroe," called, her voice catching slightly as she approached. Leonard looked up, and for a fleeting moment, Karen saw a shadow of weariness cross his features, as if he braced himself for yet another confrontation. Her heart sank, but she pressed on, holding out a small wooden sign she had commissioned in secret. The words carved into it read, "Feeding the forgotten is never a crime." Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "I thought we could put this up, so people know this is okay, that you're welcome here." Leonard's hands, calloused yet gentle, took the sign, his fingers tracing the carved letters as if committing them to memory. His eyes met Karen's, and in them, she saw a quiet gratitude that made her throat tighten. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Karen shook her head, her resolve firm. "Yes, I did," she replied, her words carrying the weight of her unspoken apology. "I had to do this." The next day, the sign was mounted beside the parking lot entrance, its presence a quiet declaration of acceptance, a small but significant act of amends. Word of the sign and the story behind it rippled through the community, not with the fleeting frenzy of a viral post, but with the steady, enduring resonance of a tale about redemption and unity. Over the next 6 months, the feeding station transformed into something sacred, a testament to the power of small acts. The flimsy cardboard platform was replaced by a sturdy wooden one crafted by a local Eagle Scout whose pride in the project shone in his eyes. A water spigot was installed, its steady drip a lifeline for the cats. A modest weather shelter rose to shield the food from rain, its slanted roof a symbol of care. But the most poignant addition appeared one crisp October morning. A bench, simple yet sturdy, adorned with a brass plaque that read, "In honor of those who serve in small ways and large." Each morning, Leonard and Laya claimed that bench, their silhouettes framed against the soft dawn light as they watched the cats eat. Their conversations wove through the mundane and the profound, schoolyard dramas, dreams of the future, the quiet beauty of a world where kindness mattered. Sometimes other children joined them, their voices a chorus of innocence. Sometimes adults paused to exchange a few words, their presence a quiet acknowledgement of the ritual's significance. Karen, too, became a part of this daily rhythm, occasionally bringing a thermos of coffee and settling beside them, her silence a gesture of solidarity in this shared act of grace. On Veterans Day, Laya arrived with a gift, her small hands clutching a drawing she had poured her heart into during art class. The image depicted 2 versions of Leonard, one in an army uniform, standing tall with quiet strength, and the other in civilian clothes, kneeling to feed the cats, his gentleness a different kind of heroism. At the bottom, in her careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "Heroes help who needs helping." Leonard held the drawing in his hands, his eyes tracing every line, every color, as if it held a truth he had long forgotten. For a long moment he was silent, the weight of the past and the hope of the present colliding within him. "You know what, Laya?" he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. "I think that might be the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about me." That evening, in the sparse solitude of his apartment, Leonard made a rare addition to his space. He taped Leia's drawing to his refrigerator, placing it beside a faded photograph of Ellen, the woman whose memory had anchored him through years of quiet service. Standing there gazing at the two images, his past and his present, Leonard felt a revelation stir within him, a truth he hadn't grasped in his 46 years. Some forms of service, he realized, never end. They simply evolve, finding new forms, new recipients, new meaning in the quiet corners of the world. Leonard never raised his voice, never spoke of the medals hidden in a wooden box, never claimed the rank he had earned through years of unseen sacrifice. Yet when one child followed in his footsteps, his service found new life. For 847 days, he performed a simple act of kindness, spending 330 each morning to feed the stray cats behind a nail salon. When society questioned his compassion, when assumptions threatened to overshadow his quiet heroism, he remained patient, his gentleness unshaken. The viral moment that brought Leonard's story to light resonated because it touched something rare and profound: the recognition that service wears many faces, and the smallest acts of compassion often demand the greatest courage. In a world quick to judge, Leonard's story was a reminder that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they carry cans of tuna, kneel on cracked concrete, and whisper to forgotten creatures who know nothing of war but everything of kindness.